I was born in a little town up in northern Minnesota, but I came to Salem when I was 7 years old. I grew up in this town. My family and I grew up in Salem First Baptist Church down here. I was married in that church. I was going to say I'd be buried in that church, but that's not true.
Come over here to the camera so these guys can see your face.
And I still have roots there. At age 16, I went off to a Christian college. I had made a profession of faith when I was about 9, because we were in a Sunday school overall meeting where the gospel was brought. When they asked for close eyes and raise their hands, I peeked and I saw my sister raise her hand, and I thought, I can't go home with my sister raising her hand and me not raising them. And so I was baptized, and I went off to a Christian school, and it was there in the first week of spiritual renewal that I vividly remember transferring that faith of my family and my church to my personal faith. And I could tell you story after story about what happened because of that, the changes that came in my life almost immediately because of that. But I was sitting in Billy Graham was the president of the school at the time, so we had world-class speakers all the time. And I don't remember who the speaker was, but I remember he spoke on doubt. And he said, if you have any doubts about your belief, your fundamental belief, drive a stake in the ground right now that you can always go back to. I know exactly where I was sitting in that building when I drove that stake. I've never had a doubt since that I needed to go back to that stake, but I'd love to reflect on it. I went on from there. I had a major in Bible and a major in history as well. Went on to a year of seminary, and then into the business world, where I discovered that God had given me a huge amount of leadership skills and gifts, if you will, that were transformed by the Spirit of God when He came into my life. I had not led anything, including my dog, around the block until the Spirit of God came into me, and then I became a leader almost everywhere I went. So I can attest to how that really works, and that gifts that come from God. I loved what you said earlier, and I'm sorry that I didn't get names. I don't hear well, so when you were all talking, it's difficult for me. But I thought when you said something there earlier that we also could talk, Dan, about business as ministry, because there's a wonderful book out there written by Tim Keller called Every Good Endeavor that talks about this whole idea of the theology of work, and how the place we are drawn by God and assigned by God, the Blackaby brothers say, is our ministry. It's my church. The people that work for me were the constituents of my church, and that's why that demeanor thing is so important to me, because I loved those people. I wanted them to know Jesus, and I did everything that I could, including getting them in. At one point in time, I had about 400 people, and I told my assistant I wanted to talk to them in groups of about 15 or 20, not realizing how many groups it was. And I just simply got them in the cafeteria in small groups, and I told them what I just told you, and that Jesus came into my life, and that the Bible is my guide, and it's what we use to run this business. It's the principles that we are here, because, by the way, I believe every business that's successful long-term is run on biblical principles. They may not know that, they may not embrace that, but it's true, because that's what works. And it was fun to watch around the room as I did that, because I saw some people staring at their shoes, and other people were smiling. So I knew who the believers, or at least the church people, were. And I didn't even think about the fact that word would get around pretty quickly as to what those meetings were about. And I had, 20-some meetings probably ago. But it was my opportunity, after living the life before them, to declare it. And because I was in the position I was in, I had a right to do that. And I did. I had one person feedback who sent me a memo simply saying, I don't believe those things. I had a wonderful assistant, best executive I've ever worked with, who was a serious Christian. And I asked her to talk with this person and just simply explain to her, nobody's asking you to do that. We're simply saying to you, that's what I do, and that's why I'm successful and why this business is. So incidentally, I went on, and I think Dan or somebody indicated, I guess it indicates up here, that I led a company that's now called Moda Health from about $4 million in 23. I remember I was employee number 23 when I went there, to where there are 1,400, 1,500 people there today and revenues of nearly 3 million. I took it to about 500 million before I left there. My authority to talk to you about business is that career that I had there building that company, but also you'll see there that I have an MBA. I studied and received that MBA after I was 80 years old. Yes, I said 80. And I look back and people would ask my wife why I was doing that. And she said, I think he just thinks he needs something to do. I had a greater reason. I am an alum of the Harvard Business School, so people assumed I had an MBA from there. I did not want anybody to understand anything that was not true. And I'd always wanted one. And so it became available through my university. I graduated from the same school 63 years apart. And you should have seen the look on the people in the auditorium when I walked up the aisle with my diploma in my hand, look at me like, what is this? And in the middle of that program, I was asked to think about teaching in it, which I do now. I also teach out at Corbin. Kevin, if I at all understood what you were saying you do, I suspected that in the background of these financial issues are some lack of integrity, some things that might not have been done correctly, a la Enron or people like that. And I think it's important for us to understand that every business reflects its leader. The leader is the one who sets the culture, the one who sets the tone for the company. And you need to understand that in any business before you're leading, that the leader sets the tone, and people, you cannot live two lives. Your goals, your objectives, your core values need to be the same as the organization that you run. I also want to say for the benefit of the old ones, if you're still on there, Cheryl, last night I failed to take an Ambien, and I've got my hand in way too many things going on right now. I'm trying to get ready. I'm going to be gone for the month of September, traveling to visit my family in the East, and we've not seen obviously for months. So I should have taken an Ambien last night, Cheryl, and I did not do that. But I did take a 5-hour energy this morning before I left home to be sure I didn't crash my car on the highway, because I have trouble driving early in the morning with getting drowsy. That was for Cheryl, because she and I had a little discussion earlier about a little bit of that. A couple of other reactions to what I was hearing this morning. Oh, Cheryl, I also would tell you that in all of what I and who I am, my mission in life is to reduce the population of hell. In so many words, to help to reduce the population of hell. I'm drawn to Mercy Mike because the president of my university, who's a close friend of mine, has a life verse of Micah 6:8, in which one of the phrases in there is to love mercy. And I've always believed in business's mission. I've always believed in Christian humanitarian organizations if the emphasis properly is on the gospel. And when I saw the name Mercy, I thought, aha, somebody gets it over there. And I'm willing to take time I do not have to be a part of that. I have been retired for quite some time, and my wife of 47 years, the love of my life, died 20 years ago. I subsequently was remarried to, most men get one good wife, maybe. I got two great ones, thanks to the grace of God. But I owe her time, and I owe her some of my energy. And I tend to get caught up because one of my passions, and Dan knows this, is to run the race the way Paul talks about running the race. And Paul says you run to win. And I'm in the last lap of that race, which means I have to run harder. And it's harder to run. That's a part of it too. I'm 40 years old, except my body is about 100. And so I'm just anxious to finish that race. I hate the finish well thing. It's finish winning the race. Paul doesn't say run the race out or dawdle on over the finish line. He said you run to win. I was always puzzled by something Paul said in his second letter to Timothy about he'd finished the race. And then I thought about Billy Graham sitting there for a number of years without much to give, but I guarantee you he gave a lot to his two kids that are evangelists out there that came home. to talk to him and to learn from him and to gain wisdom from him. Well, we need to get into, oh, by the way, as we talk about business now, and I want to get into the planning part, I want to be sure you understand how I see the importance of planning. There is data out there that proves that 60% of startup companies, organizations fail. 67% fail. I suspect in the nonprofit world, and perhaps in the Christian nonprofit world, it may even be greater than that. And it's my observation that that happens because people start organizations with a great passion. They have a real passion for what it is that they're going to do. There are women who make quilts, so they have a passion to open a quilt shop. But they have no business knowledge, nor do they seek any, and so they fail. That's equally true in the nonprofit world and in the Christian nonprofit world, that we need to understand the importance of knowing where we're going and how we're going to get there, which is about strategic planning. So what is strategic planning? Now, we went through this in a previous session rather quickly. I'm going to take only part of it this morning to really get some into depth so that you can really think about it in your own organization. Strategic planning defines your organization, where it wants to go and how it's going to get there. And with newer organizations, and some of you are associated with those, you really have to think about that. It's about creating a unique and valuable position with perhaps different activities than you have been doing if you've been around a while. It's a matter of trade-offs that you have to figure out what you've been doing that you ought not to do. And believe me, in strategic planning, you're going to find things that you ought not to be doing. I happen to work part-time for the Palau Association, and I've watched them over the 20 years I've been there a couple of times just totally reorganized because they realized, whoa, we got led off into something that's very important, but it's not what our calling, it's not what we're here to do. By the way, when you're thinking about, and Dan and Doug's gone, but I mean, Mike and Doug's gone, but when you think about the needs out there today, the Palau Association has looked at this whole issue of people needing help, people crying out for help. They had put some things out on social media, not even the internet, social media, that addressed that. It went into over 100 countries. Several million people, registered and saw that. Tens of thousands actually hit a button on their computer that said, I just prayed that prayer to receive Christ. Now, that's what is needed out there today, and that's what I heard Doug talking about earlier, is that it's not about Black Lives Matter. It's not about all this stuff going on in downtown Portland. It's about people who are hurting and in need. And we meet that need with the gospel. And I'm so glad to hear Doug just keep re-emphasizing that. I was involved with another Christian humanitarian organization on their board for a number of years, and we were in the same position. Every board meeting I kept harping, but we're trying to transform lives, but only God transforms lives. We got to get the gospel into this. So it's very important to understand that sometimes we need to stop what we're doing and do something else. And so there are a number of things here that we could look at as to what is strategic planning. Why do it? I've talked about that a little bit already. We need to know where we're going. How in the world, if I get in my car, when I leave here, I better have a plan or I might end up in Eugene, and I live in Portland. So you have to know that you have a clear path of where you are going. I happen to be going to the East Coast early next month, and I'm going into, I think, 7 states. And I not only have a clear plan, I have, because I'm taking other people with me on part of it, I have it written down on a piece of paper exactly where we're going to be every night. Now, I don't normally do that because I like to be a little bit more loose when I'm traveling. But we need to have a clear path where we're going and to have a clear focus on that. We need to establish priorities, and planning also make sure that we use the resources that we have and use them well. And finally, and I think this may be more important than we sometimes think, it's a matter that every employee understand what that plan is. I think the data would show that the majority of people in this world do not like their job. Some of them hate it. I submit to you the reason for that is they do not know how it fits. They know that they're somehow there entering all the checks that come in today, but they have no concept of what that means in the overall organization. Mike, in Mercy, it's important that everybody understand that it's the gospel, that that's really what it's about in the final analysis of things. So that's a very, very important part of strategic planning, that everybody understand what their job is. When do we do this? I simply say now. If you have not done this, now is the time. And I want to take the time here as we go into this now to help you really think through and perhaps write some things down as to how that planning gets done. The planning needs to be led by the CEO with some senior management people. Small organizations, that may be 2 people. And it's all about changing the course of things, because so much has been changing, and it's changing every single day. We don't know what businesses are going to be doing tomorrow. They may shut it down again, or they may open it up more. And in the end result, it's all about increased profitability. The big question about business is, what is it for? And it always has been led by Milton Friedman, that businesses exist to make money. And he resisted the idea that money should be used for anything else except to give it to the owners. And if the owners wanted to give it to Mercy, then that's their choice. That no longer is the standing. Business today has to be involved in community service or it will fail. I started doing that in my business 40 years ago, and it succeeded more because that money was spent. Because just like my smile and demeanor, that was a smile in the community that said, we care about this community. We supported things like the Oregon Symphony because it made our community a better community. And I talked to, I remember I was leading a fund drive for the symphony one time, and I talked to the president of US Bank, who said, I really don't like that music, but I give to this thing because of its impact on the community. And so that's an important element of why we do planning the way we do it. The pandemic, obviously a part of it, and increased profitability. Well, I said earlier that I believed all successful businesses are built on biblical principles. So what does the Bible say about planning? Well, here you are. Proverbs, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. Another proverb, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. I love this one because it gets right back to the heart of what we do as leaders in strategic planning. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. And when I look back over my own business career, I stumbled into business in the first place because I had a second little baby born and I was trying to go to school. And my wife said to me, perhaps you need to think about a real job. And I went where God had called me in the first place, and I didn't know that. So I planned my own way, but God is the one who establishes my steps. He who is noble plans noble things, and on noble things he stands. Wow, what a tremendous statement. It gets back to that integrity issue, Dan, earlier. And this one, I push at my students, and I mean I push it hard at them. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And I tell my students, you do not work for the owner of your business, you work for God. And you better go there understanding that every day, that God is in that room with you, and that Bible laying on your desk isn't there for show. It's there because that's who you have brought with you to work today, and he's the real boss. So it begins, and now we want to get into the actual planning process. It begins by sitting down and thinking through, what are your core values? When I first went to Moda Health, which was then known as Oregon Dental Service, it didn't have anything. I mean, it was just a little business trying to happen. I look back and think, I wonder how God and why he put me there, although I know why he put me there. I had a kid in college and another one about to go there, and I went with this little company that I found out was $500,000 underwater about 6 months in. And it's a long story how we fixed that, but the point is that when after I was there and we got going and I thought about these values that Dan had you put up there, I said, we need to make clear what our value system is here. And where did I go? I went to my own value system. And so I listed about 6 or 7 values. I should have brought them with me. And I put them up everywhere. I put them in our annual report. I put them in some of our proposals that we made, particularly the larger clients. And in my own copy on my desk, I had a Bible verse beside each one of those. And I didn't start with the Bible. I started with what I believe were my values, and all of a sudden I go, whoa, I know there's a Bible verse that supports that. And a lot of it was built around treating others as we want to be treated. I wanted to treat my employees. If I walked by the mailroom and saw them stuffing envelopes hurriedly to get them done today, then I went to help stuff envelopes. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? So that those values of treating our suppliers, when I had Christmas parties in my home for my senior employees, my suppliers were there. The guy who did all of our printing. These people were there because they were part of our team, and we wanted to treat them that way. So we need to know what our core values are. And I can't encourage you enough, when you leave this meeting, write down the core values that you have that apply to your business. They're the fundamental beliefs of your organization. There are those moral values that you are going to base your ethical, all of the integrity and honesty and all that. If you don't have those moral values in place, it's not going to happen. You can talk about those, Dan, all day long, but if they don't come out of the heart and out of the scripture, it isn't going to happen. They are the principles that guide organizational behavior. I'll give you a quick example. One time we had made a presentation to a very large group that involved several $1 million of annual revenue for us, and they didn't take our proposal. They came back a year later and said, we'd like to look at it again. They just stayed where they were. And what we had failed to do in our proposal was to put a time limit in there. With any kind of business financial proposal, you always give it probably 90 days. If you don't take it then the money isn't going to hold. So these people brought to our attention that you didn't say that. So we are assuming that so I said to myself first, because I happened to have been in the room when this was going on, okay, you said you got a core value. What are you going to do with it? And so I agreed to do that. And I think it was about a $5 million annual account. At the end of the first year, we were $1 million underwater. At the end of the second year, what would you guess we were? Anybody want to think about that? Anybody want to give me a? Up 1 million. Why? Because we honored those core values and we honored God. And so God honored that business because he put me there, and I tried to honor him. Did I always? No, I failed in some instances, but not beyond the core values being upheld. Yeah. So they are the principles that guide every element. They're understood by everyone in the organization. That young woman that I told you said she didn't believe some of the things I said. Believe me, after Peggy got through talking to her, she understood. Whether she accepted, that's not my role. I love the fact that when Billy Graham was in his ministry, I was at his second ever revival meetings, which was held in Portland, Oregon, across the street from Benson Hotel. A year later, I'm in Minneapolis for number 3, and now I'm a counselor. And I watched Billy up there sometimes take half an hour or more begging people to come to Christ. When he last came to Portland, I went to see what was happening. He didn't once beg anybody to come to Christ. Twice in the meeting where I was there, he turned to Cliff Barrows and said, Cliff, would you just sing one more hymn? I think there are still some who want to come. So he had learned in that time that he can beg all he wants to, but it's the Spirit of God who brings people to himself. We are simply the messengers to bring that out there. And that's why I say I love business as ministry, because it's my opportunity in word and in deed. And by the way, don't buy into this. Preach Christ wherever you go, and if necessary, use words. My friend Luis Palau says, how else are they going to know if you don't use any words? I mean, you can live Christ all you want to, and you must. But ultimately, you have to look for that opportunity, and never misunderstand that your personal testimony isn't the most powerful thing that you have to relate to people. So you got to get those core values down. And so as a part of just my seeking to kind of get this all across to you, I say, start with getting those down. Be sure that you know, because everything is based on those, as you will see when we get to a mission statement. Now, Businesses should have mission statements and vision statements, and they get mixed up. People get out into deep water trying to figure it out. It's very simple. A mission statement simply says, this is who we are. We're in business to sell shoes, or we're in business to sell cars. It's the business that we're in. It's what we are there for. Mercy is there to help meet the needs of people. That's the mission, and to bring holistic, God-driven help to people who are in need. It's a simple statement of that. But that's why you need those core values down first, so importantly, because it needs to include those core values. That we are in business to sell shoes, but we want to sell the very best shoes that help the people the very most in their walk so they don't mess up their back. That sort of thing that comes out of our core values. Or there's a company out there, I forget its name, that think it is shoes, where every pair they sell, they give another pair to the needy. So I guarantee you their mission statement, if it doesn't, it should say, that should be in there, because that's their core purpose, is to help those people who can't buy shoes. But it needs to define the corporate purpose. It needs to be specific. It needs to avoid buzzwords or slang terms. It needs to be inspirational and powerful. It needs to be something that's attainable and to be succinct and concise. Now then, that leads you, so to go back, then what you want to do is be sure you've got those core values down first. Don't start into a mission statement without having those. That's just so important, because the mission needs to state that. So once you get that down and you know you're in the shoe business or the auto sales business, then what's your vision now that you have that set of values and that mission statement down? Well, the vision statement is simply a dream of what you want to do. Where do you want to go with this thing? I want to make Mercy Inc. the biggest and best out there, because that means we're going to reach more people with the gospel and with wholeness of life. So it's about what you want to become. I once told my pastor, I said, you need to go out sometime and stand on the curb in front of this church property and dream about what it could be here in 5 years. Just dream about that. Just get some vision as to what you want to become and what you want to see happen in this church. What are you going to look like 2 to 4 to 5 years out? What are your hopes and dreams? What problems are you solving for the greater good? And boy, as a believer, whether you're running a secular organization that's owned by somebody else, as I was, or not, you better know that you're trying to solve problems for the greater good. And who and what do you aspire to change? So let's get the goal, get the value system down, then implement that into, this is who we are, and then the vision statement of where you want to go. Now, if you go online or you go to Google and ask about these things, people will get those statements reversed. Sometimes they combine the two, but just keep in mind, it's very simple. I'm a sort of a KISS person. I believe in keeping things simple. And that is, the mission is who you are. The vision is who you want to become, where you want to go. Why you brought Mission Today into the whole realm of things was to explode that vision, if you will, to take it further. Here's a couple of examples. Tesla, their mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Do you see a value system in that? I do. What's their vision? To create the most compelling car company of the 21st century by driving the world's transition to electric vehicles. That gives me a pretty good idea of a company who's got some core values, and now they say, here's where we want to use them to take them forward. Look at Patagonia. I love this one. I don't know whether you all know Patagonia, but they make outdoor clothing, fisherman's stuff. Their mission, to build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. Again, I see values just all over that statement. Their vision, a love of wild and beautiful places, demands participation in the fight to save them and to help reverse that steep decline in the overall environmental health of our planet. Not quite as concise, and that is, very direct as I would like to see it, but boy, they said it. This is who they want to be. Southwest Airlines. The mission of Southwest Airlines is dedication to the highest quality customer service delivered with a sense of warmth, friendliness, individual pride, and company spirit. I mean, there's their there's their values: warmth, timeliness, clear values. The vision, they become the world's most loved, most flown, and most profitable airline. How can you lose? So once you get that clear, that you start with those values, you build that mission, then you look at your vision. Now you want to enter into the planning process. And this is where the water gets a little deep sometimes, because we need to do what's called a SWOT analysis, which is to look at our strengths and our weaknesses internally and our opportunities and threats externally. Now, many people will say, oh, I've done that. Well, I want to be sure that we're clear on how we do that, because it's sometimes way too easy. In the first place, you have to have a leader who is really willing to really look at things, to really go in and say, this is a strength, but boy, we are weak over here. And sometimes that's hard to do. I'm not one who believes in a lot of personal introspection. I do not sit around and try to think about what's wrong with me. I really don't have time for that in trying to move forward. I try to every day confess the sin that I know to God and to move on. But it's very hard sometimes to look at weaknesses. At one time in my life, I worked early on for Aetna, which at that time was the largest health insurer in the country other than Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I managed 17 national offices out of Hartford, Connecticut. And so I would go out to those offices and try to sit down with them and help them get better. I was in that position because I ran one of those offices and I ran it better than anybody else. And so when I would go in there and I would begin to just informally begin to think through a little bit with them without sitting down to really do this process, I would find out that, well, you know, Susie, who does this over here, she's been here 30 years. Well, the message to me was, don't touch that. And they knew they had a weakness there, but they weren't willing to engage it. So the key thing about the SWOT is to engage honestly with that integrity and honesty that we talked about earlier. It's about identifying what are our best assets? Who are the people that are best assets? Where is the money, or do we have money to move forward? What are we lacking? And then it enables us to look at the external opportunities and threats. What exists to provide a competitive edge? We're going to get more into that because it is about competition. Even with Mercy, it's about competition because there are lots of organizations out there who say they're going to help people, and some of them do, but it's still a competitive world. And then what challenges are there in business? Boy, today there are financial challenges, there are legal challenges that confront. So it means that we analyze the potential actions we might take, and it helps us look at our core competencies. Now, I said to you earlier that 2 or 3 years into my business, I looked on and said, we need our core values. Then came a day when we wanted to expand our business. We were a dental insurance only company when I went there, and we needed to expand that business into some other areas. So one of the things we did was we created for the dental world a malpractice insurance company. We did that because they were paying, we felt, far too much to national companies who were basing their rates on some heavy areas of loss. And so we just simply said we want to do something for that population with whom we work otherwise. And so the first thing we had to do was to say, well, we say we want to do that, but do we know how? Do we have any competency to do that? Well, again, at one point in my crazy business world, I had actually worked for a malpractice insurance company, so I had enough knowledge to know what I didn't know. But to make a long story very short, we went out and hired somebody who had that competency because we realized that we didn't have it. This whole notion of MercyToday, you got a guy over here who knows how to do that. So why would you do that, Mike? You wouldn't. You'd say, let's get somebody that knows how to do that. I'm here because I know how to do something that perhaps others are not blessed with knowing. So it's important to get those core competencies down at some point. Because if you're going to do some planning and say, here's our vision, we want to go over here, wait a minute. Do we have the competency to go over there, or do we know where to find it to bring it in? Maybe it's a consultant, maybe it's a specialized employee, it might be. Then it's a matter of analyzing the competition, and we're going to go into this a little bit more using something I call the balanced scorecard. looking at Porter's 5 competitive forces, and then looking at something we call the Blue Ocean Strategy. So let's look for a moment. Once we get those SWOTs down, and just let me linger there a little bit longer, to be sure that we really have put on the board, like Dan did earlier, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Now, some would use consultants in this process. I happen to have done that a couple of times when my business was pretty significant. But the danger there is the consultant is only there to do what Dan tried to do this morning, that's draw it out of you. The consultant is not there to tell you what your strengths and your weaknesses are. He's there to be sure that you really dig deep and are honest about what those weaknesses might be. So he'll typically have a whiteboard or something, and when somebody says, well, here's a strength, he'll write it down there. Then at some point they'll go back like Dan did, and they'll say, well, maybe that's not such a strength. And so they'll exit out, but they'll think of another one, so that you get the honest appraisal of where you are and what the opportunities are out there. Then you can use a tool called the Balanced Scorecard. And here's where you'll see in the little caricature here on the side, there are 4 elements that we want to look at in terms of going forward, because we can make a nice plan, and we do that based on the SWOT. Then we say to ourselves, well, where's the customer in this picture? Is this what the customer really wants? Do they really want us to go into the medical or the dental malpractice business? And we did that. We found out that absolutely they wanted to, because they all thought they were overcharged, and they were. So you do that by focus groups. You do that by, you can do that by sending out questionnaires. Probably the most important place to find that out is from your employees who deal with them, who know what the customer really thinks of you, because they hear the customer complaints and they hear the customer say what's good. But you need to find out where the customer is in all of this, how the customer views this. Then you look at the quality and efficiency of your processes. If you're going to make this plan and you see the customer needs and you believe they will respond, do you have the horses? Do you have the competent people, or as Jim Collins says, the right people in the right seat on the bus? That little phrase really works well. Do you have the right people in the right seat on the bus, perhaps including yourself? Are you really in that right seat? So you want to make sure that if you make a plan, that you can do that. If I want to go from here to Atlanta, is there a way to get there? And to do so efficiently. Then how well equipped is your organization to go forward? It's one thing to look at your quality and efficiency of what you're doing now. But if you're going to make a plan now to go forward, then do you have the strength internally to change the processes that are needed and to go forward? And finally, you look at your financial performance. You look at your assets. You look at how you use your money, how much money you have. In one of my courses that I just completed in planning like this with my with a group of people in the Middle West that I teach, they were using an example of Medtronic. I don't know if you know Medtronic, but they're the largest in the world at making healthcare devices. What do you call the one that keeps your heart going? The pacemaker and those kinds of devices. They're very inventive people. They're engineers. And one of my students discovered they had a ton of cash. They were netting $5 billion a year in cash. And so he wrestled with the fact, in looking at this, what do we do with that cash? And he called me and he said, should I put that in our final report here on how we see Medtronic? I said, well, that depends on what you want to do with that cash. If you're going to bring it up, and if you don't, you certainly ought to, because he was talking about buying back their stock. So I said to him, then you better go and find out why people would buy back their stock, because that's not a part of our course here. And he did a nice job together with his partner doing their final presentation and doing that. So you have to look at the finances. What's the status of your assets? When I discovered that our company was that much in the hole, and we had salespeople out there with company cars, we leased those cars. We couldn't afford to buy them. So you look at how your financial picture fits your dream. Again, it always comes back to that vision, that dream, and how you'd like to work it out. Now, Michael Porter, who happened to have been one of my profs at the Harvard Business School, brought out these 5 forces that he said bear upon you when you look at the competition. The first of these is the threat of new entrants. What's the possibility that you will have other people come in that will take up some of your business? One of the examples I love is if you're running a car wash and you say to yourself, what's the possibility of new people coming into the car wash business and taking some of my customers? Well, I will tell you this because I know something about that it costs about $1.25 million to open a car wash business, just to get the equipment and so forth. So there's a fairly distinct barrier there to doing that. On the other hand, there are businesses that have very little cost to start up. So you want to look at what's the threat of new entrants, and the financial element of that is a very important part of that. Then you look at the power of suppliers, the people supplying the fundamental things that you use in your business. How much power do they have over you? Can they suddenly raise those prices and put you in a difficult position? Or can they enter into your business? Is your business such that they can suddenly say to themselves, why are we supplying them? Why don't we just sell this directly to the public? And then you look at the power of buyers. How much opportunity do they have to move around? If there's a car wash on every 3rd corner, you got some problem there with the power of a buyer who can say, I don't like what you're doing here anymore. I'm going to do somewhere else. Then you look at the threat of substitutes. Are there other products that can come in that are much cheaper that can get that same job done? Gosh, I should have brought an example of that, but I'm thinking about the ads I see lately of the EKG on the cell phone. Who needs to go down to the immediate care center to spend, I don't know how much, to get an EKG when you can pull it out of your pocket and get your EKG? So that's a substitute that if I am running an immediate care center, I want to think about that. If I want to move my specialty kind of over into heart issues, then I better think about the threat of a substitute. And then what about the rivalry among competitors? I remember in the day when I was a young person here, that gas was about 28 cents a gallon, and you would see it go all the way down to 20 sometimes because they would have price wars on gasoline. So if you got a lot of competitors out there, you need to think about that rivalry there that could cause a driving down of the price and get in the way of what you want to do going forward. Then there's my favorite one, which is what I call the blue ocean. Well, it's called the blue ocean strategy. Something I discovered a long time ago, but came out in a book probably 6 or 8 years. I lose track of time a little bit. Called the blue ocean strategy, which simply says that most businesses operate in a red ocean. It's highly competitive. There's blood in the water. But look for an ocean where there's no blood in the water and go over there. And instead of competing in the existing marketplace, create an uncontested one. Now I can give you 2 or 3 examples of that. Look at Airbnb, who are in the hospitality business, but they have nobody competing with them. Hotels, yeah, they have a concierge that'll tell you where to go to eat, but they don't have a homeowner who's going to tell you all of the great things about this city and where you want to go and what you want to see. No hotel is ever going to tell you. I have a granddaughter who has 2 young children, and they love to travel. And when they do, they go to Airbnb and they will get a house. Now, what would they do with a hotel? Rent 2 rooms and put the kids over here in 1 room. I mean, come on, that doesn't get there. The house, they can live like they're at home and the kids can enjoy the travel. The family is not upset. So they went into a blue ocean. Some people would say, well, yeah, there was VRBO. And I say, no, VRBO is quite different. They're simply a leasing agent for condos, usually in tourist spots. And they work a great work there, but they're not in that ocean with Airbnb. Another one is Uber. Now Lyft came along and tried to model what they're doing, but they simply said, hey, taxis aren't getting it done and we can do something different. And again, they have people driving who will tell you if you're coming into town, things that you might want to see. I came into Portland Airport probably a year ago now. I lose track of time because of this crazy virus. But I came in at about 1 o'clock in the morning, punched my Uber icon, and immediately came back and said, because of the heavy traffic at the airport, there's only a 40% surcharge. Do you still want the car? I said, yeah, I want the car. I'm out here 1 o'clock in the morning. I need to get home. When I went out to the island, there were probably somewhere between 70 and 100 people. Now, if you've ever used Uber out of the Portland airport, you know that island out there where you go. And so I stood there probably 20 minutes waiting for my car, which was in the line of cars Uber cars trying to get in there. And by the way, they've changed that now. They move it much better. You don't wait for your car. You take the next Uber car that comes in there. But I looked across when I first came in there, and on the next aisle over, there were 3 yellow cabs. When I left there 20 minutes later, none of those cabs had moved. So was Uber in the same ocean? I don't think so. So I love that strategy of whatever business you're in, is there some element that you can do that's different, that nobody can capture. I had the fun of doing that once again to help our dental population. Most of them were using a pegboard accounting system, and if you know what that is, it's you simply write the bill and send them a copy of it and hope they pay the bill. We developed early in tabletop computers, a system where in 20 minutes at night, the dental assistant could put everything they had done coded into the computer. Our computer would dial it up at night, take in the data, send them reports of what they were doing, send the bill out for them. We were in a blue ocean. There was nobody doing that out there, and it was very successful. So I say to anybody in planning, look around and see if there might be a blue ocean. Maybe there's an area for mercy that somebody isn't touching on that needs to be happening. It's so easy, and frankly, most of the time we have to follow what Doug described as being done. There are lots of agencies who are collecting money to help these people. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do that, but is there some other place that we could help them that nobody's thought about? That's what the blue ocean is really about. And finally, what I like to call a BHAG, and as a matter of fact, Jim Collins calls it that in one of his books. I think, again, it's good to great, but it's a bold idea with a compelling goal, a unifying focal point that talks about your company identity. When I left Moda, it was called ODS Health Plan, not a common household name. And we elevated my chief financial officer to take my role there. He's still there today. And one of the things that I asked him to do was to take a week off and really put his thoughts together about where he would take this company, so that he could make a proper approach to the board of directors for the job. I wanted him because I had trained him to get that job. And when he got all done, I said, "Where's your BHAG?" And he kind of grinned. And I said, "You need a BHAG." So his BHAG was that he wanted that company to be the best known, best thought of health insurance company in Portland. Well, little did we know that because he changed his name, and almost immediately the name goes up on the arena downtown. Everybody knows who Moda Health is. If you've never watched the Trailblazer game or any other event inside that arena, then you need to. But so here's his BHAG, which is a compelling goal, a bold idea, a place to unify, because all of that and the rest of planning drives your planning. This is what we want to be. Now, we can't make a plan that says in a year that's going to happen, but we can make a plan that's on an ongoing basis that ultimately tries to lead to that. And it's hairy and audacious. Maybe it doesn't happen, but why not dream? Why not put that out there in a positive way? And then when you get the plan all done, and you have all those things down, you understand who you are with core values and your mission and your vision. You understand what you're competent at and not competent at. Then you need to step back and look at that plan and say, okay, does it work financially? Do we have a cash flow that allows us to do what we want to do? Are we managing our assets properly? Do we have profitability ratios that show we can stay on course? And do we have some indices that show what our growth can be? I mean, you cannot start out. I will not start out on my trip to the southeast without knowing I have the resources to finish that and to come home. I have an airplane ticket in hand. I have guarantees, and in some cases prepaid places where I'm going to stay, so that I know that my financial ability to do that is there. And then what's so often overlooked, and I just can't emphasize this enough, our sustainability and risk management. Let me talk first about risk management. It is a matter of looking and saying, what are the risks associated with this plan that I'm about to put together and try to make happen? Do we have the four elements that we talked about earlier, the balanced scorecard, kind of get at this, but do we have the operational capability? Do we have the developmental resources and the competency to do that? Are the finances okay? And do we have a reputation that lets us do something that really wants to move us forward? If we have a bad reputation, when I came to that little company called Oregon Dental Service, and health insurance companies are basically wholesalers. You're working through a community of agents and consultants to get your product out there. And I discovered that every major consulting firm in town had all talked together. They would never, ever use this company as a group insurer. I didn't know that till after I got there. So what did I do? I started out, I went around to each one of them and said, look, give me one small case. Just give us one small client and let us show you what we can do. And it worked, because I remember one in particular who had a very large client. He gave us a small one. 6 months later, he gave us a very large one. And I believe they still have that client today, which is probably 40 years ago. So it's a matter of being sure what the reputation is that we have. And again, that's a part of that customer issue. How do the customers see us? And then simply sustainability. If we put this plan into force, we've looked at financials, we've looked at the risks. Can we sustain this long term? Economically, environmentally, we looked at those. Remember, we looked at those threats. Right now, if I'm a health insurer, I'm seeing a threat out there of a government takeover of all healthcare, because that's one of the things that one of the parties on their platform, if you read their platform, that's clearly what it says. We will take over the health insurance. So if I'm Moda Health today and I'm planning, I've got to think about that as to the sustainability. Environmental. How long can the coal miners keep going? Again, there's a plank in that party platform that says coal mines are gone. So that's an external threat and an environmental. So can I sustain this business? And then what are the social aims that I have to make the world a better place? Because Milton Friedman was right, but he was wrong. The purpose of business today is to help make the world a better place. And every one of you that have said you're involved in some sort of Christian organization, why are you doing that? Why is Mercy doing what it's doing, Mike? It's to make the world a better place. It's to take the gospel. And that's probably as far as I'm going to go. I don't want to get into writing the plan this morning. It's too much. But let me just say this. When I think about the driving force in all of this from my perspective, because there's so much noise out there today about racism, about Black Lives Matter, and the last thing I'm interested in doing is getting into all of that. I'd rather go back to the Bible and ask myself, what does the Bible say? The Bible said, Jesus said, I came to seek and to save the lost and be sure there's racial equality. I didn't see that in the Gospel of John. He said, I came to seek and to save the lost. And Jesus had a plan. He had a business plan, if you will. What was that? It was to enlist 12 young men to train, to go out to seek to save the lost. That's a pretty simple plan. And he effectively worked that plan, because we know that by the end of the first century, something like 80% of the population in that part of the world were believers. Those 12 men, 13 as it turned out, turned the world upside down. And the Bible said that he turned the world upside down. So there was a plan there. So then what did Jesus say was his plan going forward for those men and for you and me? In Matthew 28, he said, go and make disciples and teach them to obey everything I've taught you. He didn't say go and reconcile races or go into all that. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but he simply said, make disciples. And that to me is the gospel, pure and simple. There is no other gospel. It's not to save them and make their lives better, even though that's clearly a part of what he did. And those who say that social justice is important, I say to you, where's Jesus in that? What did Jesus do? He met the needs as he saw them. He taught with the Good Samaritan. If that man wasn't out seeking people to help. He was going his way. He saw a person, he reached out and helped. And if that isn't a part of our lives, then something is very, very wrong. And yet there are those who say, but we're there to reconcile. And I say to you, no, the Bible in 2 Corinthians tells me God alone reconciles man to himself. I can be an instrument in that, but there's no reconciliation on my part. It is upon God's part, even as Billy learned about bringing people to Christ. So I need to be about with positive, trying to make an impact on this world and letting it come to me, so to speak, but be ready, as Peter said, to give an answer for the hope that's in you. And to me, that's the critical part of all of it. So planning is simply a matter of saying, okay, we're going to have limited resources. Let's be sure we identify who we are and why we're out there doing this. And then what is our vision? What is it that we want to do? I think churches today are dying for lack of a vision. There is overwhelming data that show that the primary purpose that people come to church is to hear the gospel, hear the good news, hear the Bible preaching, and worship. And that 80% of the people say, in studies that have been done, that's why they go to church, unless they have a teenager. And then you better have a youth program that reaches that teenager, or they're going to go take less preaching to get that. I'm a good example of that because I lost my two kids at their teenage years. And it took me until they were in their 50s for them to come back to the Lord. It taught me a new meaning of if you bring up a child in the way you should go, when they're old, they shall not depart from it. My kids are old, and they have come back to that and have tremendous impact. I tell you, I had the most exciting thing happen this week. I have one wayward granddaughter, and I mean really wayward. And she somehow has moved out of the area, and my dear wife keeps contact with her. I'm not sure anybody in the family does, because she has so demonstrated her waywardness that a lot of them have given up on her. And in a text yesterday, she told my wife, I have become a Christian and I am in church. Yes. I mean, that's what it's about. And so you keep praying for them and you keep reaching out to them, but you can't ram it down their throats. But I lost my kids. So there was no, what do millennials want today? My church is trying to search that out. So I asked my millennial granddaughter, she's 34 years old, has two little kids. I said, Whitney, what's the most important thing to you in the church? The safety of my kids. When I bring my kids there and put them in the program, I want to know they're there when I get back and that nobody's captured them. So she goes to a wonderful church. They have 1,000 kids, and they teach those kids what's being talked about in the morning worship service. So when they get home, they can talk with the kids and know what the kids have been learning. So, but that's really off track. But if you're in a Christian organization, that's the things you have to look at, is why are we here in the first place? And Mike, you and Doug have to constantly say that to yourselves. Why are we here? And what can we do different? Hopefully in a blue ocean, where maybe others aren't, at least in a part of what we do. So just a quick recap. It starts with your core values. Who are you and what is your company about? Then you go to the mission statement, which has to include those, which talks again about who you are. Vision statement talks about who you want to be and where you want to go. And then beginning with a SWOT, you begin to really dig into who you are and try to analyze who you can be.